in half the room is Jeff.
Good morning everyone, and welcome. I am Harry Gultepena, I'm the Executive Director at IPPR, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today for today's event. I'm obviously also delighted to welcome the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood as well. So the lineup today is fairly simple. We're going to hear from Shabana's going to do a speech to open today's event. We will then have questions from the press. There may well be a short break, and then we will be doing an in-conversation with the Home Secretary. We are really pleased to be hosting today's event. This is a core issue for the work that we do here at IPPR. Migration is one of the biggest priorities for the public. It's an area where trust is low, and after years of broken promises, people are fed up. At a time when ethno-nationalism is on the rise globally, and when fundamental norms of tolerance and decency are at risk, it is more important than ever that we have this debate in a way that is serious and that is caring. After all, migration is ultimately about people. It's about the hundreds and thousands of people in our migration system working in the NHS or in social care, the thousands waiting for outcomes of their asylum claims, often anxious about their future and their families' futures. And it's about the communities across the country that, despite moments of tension, are doing their best to rub along and try and create a liberal, open, democratic society. And that is why immigration is so important and why today's speech is so important. We absolutely agree with the government that the core principles of control, contribution, and compassion should be at the heart of this system, and that striking that balance is the only way that progressives can create lasting public confidence in our migration system and in our politics. But there have also been questions raised, including from IPPR, about some of the policies being pursued. Will they really prove more effective than previous governments who tried to do the same things? Do they really strike the right balance between compassion and control? What will they mean for some of the government's other objectives, like economic growth and reducing child poverty? And that's why we're so delighted to welcome the Home Secretary today, so she can speak directly about how her policies will achieve these things. IPPR has long been a place where progressives can come together to grapple with the big questions facing the country. A space to debate, to put arguments to the test and hold power to account, and all in the pursuit of a stronger, fairer Britain. So it's in that spirit that we host today's event, and with that, I would like to welcome Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, to the rest speech.
Thank you very much, Harry, for that kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be here and to be hosted by the IPPR, Britain's leading progressive think tank. A fitting host to set out not just what this government is doing on asylum and migration, but why. There is no denying that we meet at a difficult time for my party. It is a time when who we are and what we stand for is contested, sometimes bitterly. And nowhere is that contest more keenly felt than in the politics of migration. I have, of late, been offered wise counsel on this topic from certain quarters. I have been told that we must quite simply be more Labour. Well, you know what? I happen to agree. We should be more Labour. Of course we should be more Labour. The real question is, what does more Labour mean? Because in my view, more Labour doesn't mean more Green. Just like more Labour doesn't mean more reform. More Labour means reconnecting with who we are, who we represent, and what we believe. That begins by understanding that the Labour Party has always been a broad church. Over 100 years ago, the party drew together two disparate groups. On the one hand, a new industrial working class who joined hands and unionised, knowing that they could achieve more together than alone. And then, on the other, a new group of progressive reformers, intellectuals who were radical and ambitious for change, who turned away from the old establishment liberals to embrace the new independent Labour Party. In time, another element was added to the mix, which is where my story comes in. People like my parents, who came to this country in search of a better life. They found work here, laid down roots, and in the Labour Party, they were welcomed into a new political home. So it was that people like my dad became Labour. In between engineering jobs and buying the supplies to restock my parents' corner shop, he joined the local party, making his way to what I'm reliably informed is the pinnacle of political life in this country, the chair of the Birmingham Labour Party. Those traditions are different, but they are united by a shared set of values. First and foremost, fairness, and a recognition that in this country, the dice are loaded against working class communities. Alongside that, a belief, not just in greater equality in general, but that contribution specifically must be rewarded, and that rights flow from our responsibilities to one another. We are also united by an enduring decency and tolerance towards others, informed by a quintessentially British desire to live and let live. We are, and have always been, internationalists in outlook, alongside a quiet but profound patriotism. As I have said before, it is a patriotism that's best defined by George Orwell. A love of this country for what it is, always has been, and always will be, but also for its capacity to change. As Orwell wrote in The Lion and the Unicorn, what can the England of 1940 have in common with the England of 1840? But what have you in common with the child of 5 whose photograph your mother keeps on the mantelpiece? Nothing, except that you happen to be the same person. Ours is a patriotism that unites timeless tradition with an acceptance, a welcoming of change. As a Labour Home Secretary, it is my job to ask, with those values in mind, what should our migration system look like? Well, it would surely start with levels of migration that are first and foremost fair. Fair to those living in this country today, particularly the working class communities whose plight has always energised this party above all others. Fair also to those seeking a new and better future in this country, with skills to bring and a contribution to make. And what of our asylum system? It would surely mean delivering the noble intentions of the drafters of the original 1951 Refugee Convention, providing safety to genuine refugees, shelter from the storm until they are able to return safely home. That, as the Convention clearly states, the right to protection must come alongside a responsibility to live by the laws and values of this land. And finally, that our asylum system is not abused by unscrupulous people smugglers who profit from false promises and trade in human misery. Take all that together, and you find that Labour values applied to our migration sit at neither extreme. They are no invitation to the fairy tale of open borders, Zach Polanski's revolutionary Green Party demands, and neither are they the nightmare of Nigel Farage, pulling up the drawbridge and shutting out the world, narrowing our proud patriotism into a crude ethno-nationalism. Between those two extremes, there is ample space for a migration system that is fair, but where it needs to be, firm. There can be both compassion and control in a system that rewards contribution and those who play by the rules. Against that bar, how does migration and asylum in this country fare today? Are we living up to those values? The answer, quite clearly, is no. We are not even close. On legal migration, Zach Polanski provides the rhetoric, but it was the Tories who provided the living experiment of open borders. Between 2021 and the 2024 general election, they oversaw net migration of 2.5 million. To put that in some context, At least 1 in every 30 people in the UK today arrived in that time. In just 4 years, this country experienced levels of migration it had previously seen across 4 decades. It was not just the scale, but also the nature of that change that was so destabilising. This was most evident in the scandal of lowering the skills requirements for some of those who arrived on the health and social care visa. As we now know, fraud was rife, with phony care providers created to draw people to this country on a false promise of work. Absent action, over the next 5 years, some 350,000 low-skilled workers and their dependents will qualify for settlement. At that point, they will gain access to welfare, free healthcare and social housing. We must be honest about the scale of this. We have never, in this country, in the history of this country, had so much low-skilled migration in so little time. We estimate, based on findings from the Migration Advisory Committee, that the lifetime cost to the taxpayer will be £10 billion. That figure would be paid for by working people in this country. It would mean ever longer waits for the 1.3 million people in this country on the social housing list, and yet more pressure placed upon our National Health Service. It is an affront to the idea of fairness within our migration system. Our asylum system is no closer to embodying Labour values. Criminal gangs are profiting from their vile trade in human beings. People have travelled the world with untold suffering in the process, and over 180 people have died in those final miles across the Channel. Our own system has faced immense pressure. Since the small boats first arrived, nearly 200,000 people have come to this country across the Channel. Today, over 100,000 people live in asylum accommodation paid for by the taxpayer. And this includes both those awaiting an asylum claim or an appeal, and also thousands who have failed their claims but cannot be returned to their home country. The pressure on the taxpayer is vast. Last year alone, £4 billion was spent on asylum accommodation. And I can tell you, as someone with 3 asylum hotels in my own constituency, that the pressure on local communities is considerable. It is worth pausing on that thought, on what this system looks like to those outside of rooms like these. Hard-working people across this country engaged in the daily struggle to make ends meet. They see a state that they pay taxes towards, yet it is proving unable to stop a flow of dinghies across the Channel. And they see a state that is paying billions towards hotels like the one near them. It doesn't look fair because it's not fair, and it erodes their trust in government. That erosion in trust matters, because people ask fairly, if we cannot deal with so visible a failure, what can the state achieve at all? It is our creed as the Labour Party that the state can and must be a force for good. Without the trust of citizens in the state, there is no space for Labour values in any part of government to be realised. Restoring order and control at our border is not a betrayal of Labour values. It is the necessary condition for a Labour government to achieve anything it hopes to. It is within that context that I am embarking on some of the most significant reforms to migration, both legal and asylum, in a generation. On legal migration, that means ensuring we are attracting those who can and will contribute to this country. That migration levels are manageable, so we are attracting high-skilled workers, while at the same time introducing new controls to migration routes, which has now seen net migration fall by nearly 70%. For those who come to this country, who can contribute to our national life, I am clear. They should have a path to settlement and ultimately citizenship. I want people to put down roots in this country and to contribute to our national life. But it is essential that the privilege of living in this country forever is earned and not automatic. We are currently reviewing the responses to our consultation on the new rules around settlement. But let me be clear about the principles that we put into that consultation. First, the qualifying period for settlement should move as a norm from 5 years to 10. Secondly, there will be certain conditions that must be met in order to qualify. A clean criminal record, no debt to the taxpayer, a history of being in work and paying taxes, and higher standards of English language. In this week's rule changes, we made the first of these changes. A year from now, those who arrived on a visa, now seeking settlement in this country, will need to speak English as a foreign language to A-level standard. I should also state for the record that we are talking about English as a foreign language. A working knowledge of Shakespeare and Chaucer is very welcome, but will not be a condition of settling in this country. Command of the English language itself, however, will be. Our intention, subject to consultation, is that the point at which settlement is possible will now vary. We have proposed that some will earn settlement at or earlier than 5 years, including public servants like doctors and nurses, and those who are contributing the most to the nation's finances. Others will have to wait longer before they can apply for settlement. It is entirely consistent with Labour values that we address the challenge posed by the impending settlement of the hundreds of thousands of low-skilled workers and their dependents who arrive between 2022 and 2024. That means applying any rule changes to those who are in the UK today but have not yet received settled status. If we do not, we will see a £10 billion drain on our public finances and further strain on public services like housing and healthcare, already under immense pressure. That is an affront to the idea of fairness within our society. It is an affront to every family currently waiting for social housing, to those who have already spent too long on an NHS waiting list, and to British taxpayers who will inevitably foot the bill. We must restore fairness to our migration system. In the asylum system, that means we will always offer protection to genuine refugees. This country has shown enormous generosity in recent years to those fleeing war or persecution, including over 310,000 Ukrainians granted leave on the Ukrainian visa schemes and 184,000 Hong Kongers who hold British nationals overseas status. We will now open new and safe and legal routes, starting this autumn by opening a new student refugee route, with the first arrivals in autumn 2027. This will be the first of a series of new safe and legal routes, which will include a new work route and the expansion of community sponsorship following the success of the Homes for Ukraine scheme. But at the same time as showing that immense generosity of spirit, we must wrest control over migration back from the smugglers and restore order and control at our border. That means bearing down on illegal routes to this country, tackling illegal crossings, and as a result, reducing the burden of so many living in asylum accommodation. Since launching the Border Security Command, we have made over 5,000 law enforcement disruptions of smuggling gangs and stopped more than 40,000 attempted crossings. But clearly, it is not enough. Crossings continue, up last year and the year before. And while asylum claims have fallen across Europe, they have been rising here in Britain. We must remove the incentives that are fueling the human trafficking trade and have left us with 100,000 people now living at huge expense to taxpayers. Today, seeking refugee status in Britain is more attractive than in other countries in Europe. A 5-year initial period of leave leads almost automatically to settled status. This means refugee status is, in effect, permanent from day one. This fact encourages asylum seekers to pass through other safe countries in pursuit of asylum here, including the tens of thousands without a legitimate claim who have, in effect, tried their luck here, considering the risk worth the huge reward. This government will never step back from our responsibility to provide refugee status to those fleeing war and persecution. But we will now restore this to the intention of the 1951 Convention, that refugee status is a temporary sanctuary, a safe haven until a return home is possible. Because refugee status shall, and I quote from the Convention, cease to apply to any person who can no longer, because the circumstances in connection with which he has been recognised as a refugee have ceased to exist, continue to refuse to avail himself of the protection of his nationality. That starts with a change to migration rules, which comes into effect this month. This will see a reduction in initial leave to remain for refugees from 5 years to 2.5 years. At that point, a refugee's need for protection will be reviewed. If they still require it, their status will be renewed. If they do not, and their home country is safe, they will return home. This brings us into line with countries like Denmark, where I visited last week. There, a social democrat government has introduced reforms that have ended their asylum crisis and saved social democracy in that country from resurgent extremes of the hard right and the hard left. We should be proud of the protection we provide to those fleeing danger, but we must also enforce our rules, and those who come here must live by our laws. This government will today introduce new secondary legislation which will remove the duty to provide asylum support, replacing it with a power to do so. Those who require it and play by the rules will rightly continue to receive asylum support, but those who do not will have their support removed. The generosity of the British people will become conditional on those seeking asylum following the law, living by our rules, and not working illegally. Taxpayer-funded accommodation will be reserved for those who have no right to work and will otherwise be destitute. Just as for any British citizen, rights must come with responsibilities, and British taxpayers cannot be expected to fund the lives of those who refuse to meet them. Once we have determined that somebody does have a right to be in this country legally, it is essential that they leave. There is nothing fair about not enforcing our rules, particularly as we know that many will melt into illegal work, undercutting legal workers. Since taking office, we have removed nearly 60,000 people with no right to live here. That's almost a third under this government. But we must go further. I've already announced that we will tighten our application of domestic law to ensure that legitimate removals cannot be thwarted by the abuse of human rights and modern slavery legislation. I have also announced that we will reform our appeals system with a new body that echoes once again the reforms introduced in Denmark, where appeals are heard fairly and swiftly. One of the great successes of the Danish model has been the use of incentives, which sees 95% of removals take place voluntarily. This government will now pilot a similar model for families who are failed asylum seekers, a small number of whom will now be offered an increased incentive payment of £10,000 per person and up to a maximum of £40,000 per family. To put that in important context, today, a family of 3 asylum hotel accommodation costs up to £158,000 per year. Should these incentives prove effective, they will represent a significant saving to the taxpayer. Where a voluntary removal is refused, we will escalate to an enforced removal for those who can be returned to their safe home country. We are now consulting on precisely how the removal of families with children must take place, in a way that is humane and effective. For too long, families who have failed their claims have known that we are not enforcing our rules, which created a perverse incentive to make a channel crossing with children in a small boat. It is now on the parents in these families who can safely return to the home they came from to do the right thing by accepting an incentive payment rather than face an enforced return. Regardless of what my political opponents may like to pretend, enforcing our borders is not a unilateral process. It requires a partnership with countries across the world. Every week, planes lift off from this country to return those with no right to be here, returning citizens to countries across the world who play by international rules and norms just as we do. That partnership allows us to remove failed asylum seekers, visa abusers, and foreign criminals, all of whom are being removed from this country at a rate far higher than the one that we inherited. The Labour Party has always been internationalist, but while we speak softly, we are not fearful of carrying a big stick. Since I became Home Secretary, I've shown my willingness to do so. I threatened visa sanctions on 3 countries who are refusing to take their citizens back, all of whom, I'm happy to say, are now playing by the international rules. Today, I can announce that I'm suspending certain visa routes for a further 4 countries: Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar and Sudan, where abuse has been unacceptably high. I will also impose visit visas on Nicaragua and St. Lucia, as their visa-free entry has created a backdoor into this country. I introduce all of these measures in an attempt to bring our systems of legal migration and asylum into line with this party's values, upholding our international responsibilities while securing our own borders, fair but firm, compassionate but controlled, rights earned through responsibilities fulfilled, integration expected and encouraged, and contribution to our national life a necessity, not an option. We can and we must restore order and control at our borders. There is nothing inconsistent with Labour values in doing so. But for those who continue to doubt that, I invite them to consider the consequences if we do not. I know the people of this country are by nature open, tolerant and generous. But I also know that there are conditions to that. When people see small boat arrivals at their current scale, or they experience the pace and scale of migration today, they feel, with justification, that things are out of control. That loss of control breeds fear, and when fearful, people turn inwards. Their vision of this country narrows, and their patriotism turns into something smaller, something darker. An ethno-nationalism emerges. The idea of a Greater Britain gives way to the lure of a littler England, and other voices to the far right, take hold. If the left does not secure our borders, the hard right will be given the chance to try, and they will not be restrained by values like ours. Instead, they will pull up the drawbridge. Those who have been here for decades, legally, with settled status, will suddenly hear a knock on their door one night, bundled into the back of a van, separated from children and grandchildren, and deported from this country that they have made their home. With deportations on the scale that reform now promise, there is no way of achieving them without sending people back to a country that is not safe, and where on return they could be killed. Make no mistake, by restoring order to our borders, we are fighting for the very existence of a humane asylum and migration system in this country. Some say, in response, that we should turn to the path proposed by the Greens, that we should create a world without borders, that nation states are social constructs, and that patriotism is a dirty word. To some, these might seem like harmless student politics, but the danger and the possible damage is real. A party leader who seeks the highest office in the land should not be on the beaches of France helping migrants onto small boats, encouraging them to make a perilous crossing. And what he did personally, his policies will do many times over, creating further incentives to come to this country illegally and increasing the already vast burden placed on taxpayers in this country. Farage calls for border control without fulfilling our humanitarian and international duties. Polanski calls for the most expensive and expansive migration policies anywhere in the world, without any attempt to control the border. Nightmare on the one hand, fairy tale on the other. That leads me back to where I began, with those words of advice I have received. More Labour. Because more Labour doesn't mean open borders, and more Labour doesn't mean closed borders either. More Labour means a migration system that welcomes those who come here and contribute to our national life. But it means an end to uncontrolled migration that places immense pressure on strained public finances, when it is working people in this country who pick up the bill. More Labour means offering safety and sanctuary to those fleeing war and persecution. But it also means not creating incentives that fuel international people smuggling. It means enforcing our rules and removing those with no right to be here. More Labour means showing that the nation state can function, starting with my duty to restore order at the border. More Labour means ensuring that we succeed in that effort, not only because doing so is consistent with our values, but because if we fail to and retreat to the comfort of fairy tales, a nightmare will follow, as those who follow us will have none of our restraint. More Labour means taking the decisions now that will ensure there always remains an asylum system in this country. And in doing so, it means guaranteeing that it will always be true that those like my parents, who sought a new and better life here, worked hard, played by the rules, and contributed to our national life, can find in this country a home. And that just decades later, children of theirs may unthinkingly call themselves English, or a Brit, or even a Brummie, just like me. Thank you very much. We're going to take some questions from the press now. We've got sort of about 45 minutes, so I'm going to kick off first with Chris Mason at BBC.
Thank you, Secretary. Chris Mason, BBC News. Given the number of times the government has made promises only to retreat, can you convince our audience that you can convince your own colleagues that this is a goer? And if I may, can you address those who look at the government's response to war in the Middle East and see indecision, prevarication and a lack of preparedness? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Look, firstly, I've set out these reforms. I made these announcements back in November. We've been cracking on with implementing the reforms that I have announced. Of course, I engage with my colleagues all the time. I've had lots of conversations with people. I think that the whole package of the reforms, both on asylum and on legal migration, have a majority of support from my colleagues. Obviously, as we continue to roll out changes, we will have more rule changes, legislation later this year. I'll take you to those moments as they come, but I am very clear in the argument that I am making that these are reforms that are consistent with Labour values, and if we don't resolve these problems, others with none of our values will be given the chance to do so instead. And I think that is a choice my colleagues are also very well aware of, so I'm confident that we can press ahead, and we will be doing so. And then secondly, just on Iran, let me just say, look, I've been involved in some of these conversations as part of the National Security Council and the wider cabinet. It is this government's responsibility that the Prime Minister is leading, that we take incredibly seriously, to always put our national interest first. That has applied to every decision that we've made in respect of this matter, and particularly in relation to the defensive action that we are taking part in, because we wish to protect British lives, our citizens out there in that region. So whatever we have done and every decision we've made has been based on an assessment of the British national interest, which I'm sure your viewers and everyone else can agree must always come first. Beth, maybe from Sky.
Thank you. Secretary. You say Zach Lansky's living in a fairy tale, but it's clear that many progressive voters, and maybe some in your own party, prefer the story he is telling than yours. The Greens won the Bolton and Denton by-election. Over 100 of your own MPs are writing to you, urging you to vote back on these reforms. Are you not simply going to split over and get blocked by your own MPs anyway? And just secondly, on President Trump, he says the special relationship's in ruins, that Keir Starmer is no Churchill. He's also criticised you on immigration, saying the UK is, quote, letting in people from foreign lands that hate us, and that Sadiq Khan, who we previously accused of bringing Sharia law to London, is doing a, quote, terrible job. Does this sort of criticism anger you? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Beth. Look, as I've just been setting out in my speech, there are, of course, alternatives to how we are progressing with resolving issues in the asylum system and with migration, both on the left and the right of British politics. But those, they have the wrong answers, and it's our job as a Labour Party to make the case for Labour values that are able to build a broad enough coalition across the whole of the country that can unite the country. What's being offered by the Greens and others are at the extremes of politics, not interested in building a broad coalition of voters, but actually...
Sorry, but Hannah Spencer is not
No.
extreme.
What I'm saying is it's about polarisation, and what I'm saying is we're setting out a set of reforms that I believe that already the polling has shown have a plurality of support from voters across the country. When we released our asylum reforms in November, the polling showed that not only were they popular across different parts of the country, but even with a plurality of Green Party voters, those asylum reforms were popular. So I think there is a desire across the country of every type of voter in every part of the country to see a sensible migration and asylum policy being pursued. People agree, I think the majority of people in this country agree, that the system is out of control, and the Labour Party is putting forward our way of resolving these issues. Of course, there will be other offers available. There's a long time to go between now and the next general election. I'm sure that these issues will be much contested before we get to that general election. But I'm very clear, the Labour Party, being the broad church that we are, being a coalition of interests that we are the best place to build a coalition of voters across this country, just as we did in the 2024 general election as well. And then let me just say, look, on what's happening in Iran and President Trump and his comments. Firstly, of course, as I've just said, we will always prioritise the British national interest and always act in line with that. The President will say some things that we agree with and others that we disagree with. We are getting our immigration system under control. That is my job. That's what I've been setting out today, and we will pursue that. Others can comment as they wish, but what I am motivated by is resolving problems for citizens in our country. And let me just say on Sadiq, I think he's doing an excellent job as Mayor of London. And there is a lot of misinformation that is often put out about what's happening in London, whether that's on crime rates or whether that's on things like Sharia law, for example, which are just misinformation. That's plain wrong. And I think that Sadiq is doing a good job. And the proof of that is the fact that he's won a mandate from the people of London on 3 separate occasions. Let me take Harry Horton now from ITV.
Thank you, I'm Secretary Harry Horton, ITV News. Some of the policies you've announced today are quite a stark change from what was in Labour's manifesto about smashing the gangs. What do you say to people, many in your own party, who look at policies like deporting families with children, removing refugees after 2.5 years, and they say that the hard right, as you put it, has already won, it's captured you, and it's setting the agenda for this Labour government?
The only thing that's setting the agenda for this Labour government is Labour politicians like me coming up with Labour answers to problems that our country faces, and this is very much a Labour agenda, and I am a Labour Home Secretary. We promised to control our border in our manifesto. Yes, of course, we talked about the gangs that are operating, and we've taken huge action on that, and as I said in my speech, 5,000 disruptions in collaboration with our partners in France and elsewhere in Europe. We've disrupted up to 40,000 crossings being made. Obviously, crossings are still being made, so we know that that's not enough and we must go further, but we are fulfilling the policies of our manifesto and the promise that we made to the British people that we would sort our migration and asylum systems out, and that's what these policies are designed to do. And just on the returns of families, we're talking about people who have failed in their claims, who have exhausted all of their rights of appeal and who do not have a right to be in our country. And it cannot be the case that any party can say it's fine to break our rules, have no right to be here, but it's okay, we're just going to look the other way. That is the kind of behaviour that I think has cost us huge public confidence in this system, because we're not enforcing our rules. And what that says to people who do follow the rules and who do abide by the laws of this land, that actually if you can get away with it, what incentive is there for others to follow the rules in the first place? So I think it's incredibly important. If you're going to have rules, you've got to enforce them. Otherwise, it rather begs the question of why you bother in the first place. Catherine Forster now from GB News.
Thank you, Catherine Forster, GB News. You're talking tough on cracking down on illegal migration, but we've heard a lot of pledges before. Why should GB News viewers believe that you will be able to get all these measures through your own MPs, knowing that they have a habit of saying no to things they don't like and stopping the government doing things, and also past lawyers, and also on the situation in the Middle East we are involved, whether we like it or not. Haven't we been rather slow in sending, for example, the warship to the Middle East still in Portsmouth, given that we knew of this US build-up and the likelihood that we would need to defend ourselves there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, we made a set of commitments in our manifesto. Labour Party has to pursue reform of this system, and I put forward a set of Labour reforms, based on the values of the Labour Party, that I believe have a majority of support in Parliament and amongst our own members of Parliament. But look, these are debates, and people will have their views and they will make their arguments. This is obviously a very public process, and for those who don't wish for the system to reform, they will have to explain what they want to do instead and how they will fund the consequences of alternative choices that could be made, and who will ultimately be paying the price. That is the nature of debate in this country. It's the nature of scrutiny in this country. I put forward a set of proposals. They are being scrutinised, and people have alternatives. Regardless of who they are, those too will be scrutinised, and in the end it is the public that will want to see confidence from its politicians in dealing with these problems that we face and in having answers that can meet the scale of the challenge. And what I would say to you in terms of action is we're cracking on. I've been in the job for I think just over 6 months. It does feel a bit longer than that, but we made these announcements in November. We're cracking on with implementation. We're only just into March. We'll keep going. We will have primary legislation as well as secondary legislation and rule changes in the normal way for immigration rules that happen automatically twice a year. So we're cracking on with making the changes. So I'd say to your viewers and others who are watching, judge us by our record and what we actually deliver. And then just on, consequences of the action in Iran, we've been building up for some weeks activity and resource in Cyprus in order to protect our interests there and to do the right thing. And of course we're now taking more action as well. We don't accept what's been said on pace. We've always made these decisions putting the British national interest first, and we have already been acting, and now we are also going further. Let me take Natasha Clark from LBC.
Hi, Natasha from LBC. On the issue of paying failed asylum seekers up £10,000 each, up to £40,000 to leave, reforms say that you're incentivising more people to come and that it's a golden goodbye for people who are abusing the system. On the other hand, the Greens say you're making a scapegoat of migrants. What's your response to those criticisms? And just on Iran, we saw some clashes in Greater Manchester last night after a vigil was arranged for the former Ayatollah. Are you worried about tensions in the Middle East playing out on the streets across Britain? Should we be concerned about an increased threat here? Thank you.
Well, firstly, just on the question of incentives, both the Green Party and Reform are wrong. We already, and have under previous governments as well, offered incentive payments to people for them to leave this country, to encourage that to happen. What we've seen in Denmark is a much more generous offer, a much higher incentive in order to encourage people to leave, which has been working over there, and that's why we've decided to run this pilot to trial a period where we offer, as you say, £10,000 for per person, up to a maximum of £40,000 for families. And again, important to remember, and these are questions for others to answer as well, whether that's Reform or the Greens, these are people who have failed in all of their asylum claims in this country, whether they are individuals or in families, people who failed their claims, people who have had multiple appeals and have exhausted all of their appeal rights and therefore have no right to be in this country. And again, I think people would expect us to be doing everything we can to encourage those people to leave. That is the thinking behind both the pilot on incentivisation and also the consultation on how we effect the removal of families, including, of course, children as well. If people don't take this incentive, by the way, we will move to an enforced return. That is the point of this process. You incentivise people to take the money and to leave on their own accord, or reinforce the removal, which is obviously always much more difficult to do, but we will crack on with doing so. And again, important to remember in Denmark, which has had huge success with both incentivisation payments and getting control of its border overall, 95% of the removals from that country are voluntary. So it's worked in other places, I believe it can work here, and that's why we're doing this project. I've got Anna from Times Radio next.
Anna Mahmood, Times Radio. Britain's welfare bill is set to rise to over 400 billion a year by 2030. You talk a lot about Denmark, but Denmark takes a much tougher approach to getting people back into work in particular, and of sickness benefits. Do you think £400 billion a year is sustainable? Do you think it creates a pull factor for people to come here, which undermines the measures that you are introducing if it isn't combined with cuts to welfare spending? And do you want to see it reduced?
Well, I think the first top point is that long before you get to what's available in the welfare state for those who have legal status to be here, is that we're not enforcing our rules properly anyway. The reason we're proceeding with removing the duty to support somebody and removing that from a duty to a power to support people is because there are already people in the asylum system who are receiving asylum support, and the combination, by the way, of asylum support for all asylum seekers is about £4 billion a year, but a proportion of those people have arrived in the country on a legal route, had the right to work under that route, and had to show that they could support themselves before they came into this country. And it's right that we now look at whether they receive asylum support or are actually expected to support themselves, having given those commitments when they came into the country in the first place. And separately also, in large parts of our system, if you've made yourself intentionally homeless, for example, a local authority does not have to house you. If you're breaking other rules and conditions of support from the state, you don't receive all of those benefits from the state. It's right that we transpose the same thinking into our asylum support system, because at the moment, once you put in an application for asylum, we're pretty much supporting everybody. So now that we're moving away from this flat duty to provide support to people and moving instead to a power, and that we only support those who, without that support, would be destitute. So that is one way I think we should be able to get control of the costs. I was actually just going to come back, because forgive me, I forgot I didn't answer the second part of the LBC question on public protests. We're monitoring very closely the situation here at home in terms of the reaction to what's going on in the Middle East. It's not unusual for tensions to rise in this country based on events elsewhere. Of course, people have family and friends in other parts of the world. There are large diaspora communities here who are often affected as well. We have a large Iranian origin diaspora in this community, in this country. We have others who have fled that regime, who made this country their home. So there will be people watching very closely with a deep personal interest. And we are monitoring very carefully what's happening across the country, monitoring tensions in our communities, and the police, I know, are absolutely ready to respond to any activity that falls outside of the law.
Sorry, do you want the welfare spend to reduce? You can answer that question.
Well, look, I'm not here making policies for the wider welfare system. What I'm setting out is the welfare system insofar as it interacts with the migration system, and I've set out a range of policies and proposals today that are designed to get some of that spending back into control. Darshan Soni from Channel 4.
Thank you, Darshan from Channel 4 News. You said that these changes reflect Labour values. You know that within your own party, a lot of progressives disagree. And we're being told that 100 Labour MPs have signed this letter asking you to rethink your plans. You will need those 100 votes to get anything through the Commons, any legislation. In the past, when your backbenchers have rebelled, Keir Starmer has done a U-turn. Are you confident, if he comes under pressure, that he will stick to these plans and that he won't force you to water them down? And secondly, we've had a lot of announcements from you. You're saying that all of these measures together will deter people from coming here. Can you tell us how you will measure success? So can you say to the British people, by the next election, How many people should we expect to see coming to this country on a small boat every month? What will the numbers be if your measures work?
Thank you. Look, so, I mean, as I've been setting out today, the Labour Party has always been a coalition itself of different traditions and different interests. So we're a coalition ourselves, and we're in the business of building a coalition of voters and support out there in the country. So of course it's always going to be contested, what is the right balance in order to hold the coalition that we have in the party, but most importantly build a coalition of support out there in the country. Obviously it's my job to make sure that we can make that case and that we can win that case. What I would say on my colleagues that have said that they have some concerns, there's a whole range of those issues, some of which I think not everybody is signed up to. I will of course be engaging with all of my colleagues, not just those who've signed the letter, but the many more who have already said that they support these proposals as well. And of course, we want to get our business through Parliament. I'm confident that despite some people not necessarily agreeing, and there might be a small number that will never agree, and I think this is politics, that's fine too, but I'm very clear that we have a majority of support in the Parliamentary Labour Party in order to get these reforms passed. And what I would say to colleagues and people, as I've said in an earlier answer, we have to make a case to the country. And the country, clearly, a plurality of voters want to see reform of our migration and our asylum systems. We have to come up with the right reforms. We have to meet the scale of the challenge that the country wants us to sort out. And in the end, it's the views of our country that matters. And as I say, previous polling on these reforms has shown a plurality of voters of all different parties support the case for reform and support many of the reforms that we have introduced. So I'm confident we can crack on and that we will be able to deliver these plans. And then let me just say on what does success look like? I mean, in the end, we've got to go to the electorate, to the next general election with a system that's under control. Of course, we have to deal with the problem of votes. I haven't set an artificial target because we see what unrealistic targets have done to public confidence in migration. Old enough to remember the David Cameron tens of thousands pledge from the 2010s. There is no point killing public confidence further by setting targets that might not be met. What I would rather do is carry on delivering these reforms and then be able to show through that delivery that we are delivering a controlled and ordered system. We are reducing illegal migration into this country because we've changed the incentives, we've dealt with some of those core factors, and people are making that choice not to get in the votes. And important also to remember that because we believe in offering refuge to those who need it, we are going to create safe and legal routes for people into this country. 3 models for that: a route for refugee workers, a route for refugee students, and a route for those who can come via community sponsorship, learning the lessons from the Ukraine scheme. I believe this country is generous and wants to do the right thing by people who are suffering around the world. In order to be able to have generous, safe and legal routes into this country, we do need to crack down on illegal entry into this country. That's why the totality of these reforms not only, I believe, have parliamentary support, but support out there in the country as well. I've got Lucy Gate next from the News Movement.
Thank you, Home Secretary Lucy Gate, the News Movement. The government is losing support from young people, is cutting study visas from some of the world's poorest countries going to remedy that. Does it align with your promise to help those genuinely in need? And how do you interpret that surge in support from young people for parties like the Greens and Reforms?
Again, important to remember what we're cutting down. These are people who apply to come to study in this country and then who become asylum seekers at the end of their study period. And the rates of conversion of study visas into asylum claims is very high from these particular countries. I think if you look at Afghanistan, in the last 5 years, something like 3,500 people claimed asylum having come here as a student, and we are, in that same 5-year period, we put out 3,700 student visas. So you can see the rate of conversion from coming here as a student on this route into the asylum system is very, very high. So the reason that we are tackling this is because of that abuse. We want, in the end, to be able to bring refugee students into this country. But I think it's important, if somebody has come to study, they come to study. And once their study period is finished, they leave. The study route into this country is not the same as an asylum route into this country. And I think that when you have abuse of legal routes into this country that then convert to asylum claims, you're essentially running a legal migration system that is essentially an asylum system. And I do think that it's important that we follow the rules properly and have separation between those two things. Of course, though, in some parts of the world, we will want to, once we create safe and legal routes into this country, want to provide refuge, particularly for students as well. That's why in this autumn, so later this year, we will set up the new refugee student route, so a safe and legal route for refugee students to come. The important thing there is they will have already been accepted as a refugee, so there's none of this, studying for 3 years and then claiming asylum, in country. You'll come as a refugee, you'll be a student here, and then you'll be able to make your life here. So those proposals will be announced later this year. The route will open in autumn, ready to take applications a year later, so in autumn 2027. So if people are coming as refugees, it's important that they do come as refugees, not as something else first before converting their claim into an asylum claim. I've got Rustam Wahab from UK Fact Check.
Good afternoon, Home Secretary. This is Rustam Mahmood from UK Fact Check Politics. I wanted to ask, why is your headline penalty aimed at the asylum seeker rather than an employer who profits from illegal labour? Isn't the real pull factor the availability of cheap, exploitative work? And doesn't this policy risk expanding the underground labour market?
Well, look, we have to take action of both. I mean, the asylum reforms are not just not only about those who come who work illegally in this country, but the wider abuses within the asylum system. But we are, of course, also tackling employers as well who break the rules, and we've seen enforcement action go up under this country as well. So it is a two-pronged approach on the whole illegal working side, but the broader package, of course, is about the asylum system, because it is the incentives and the behaviour of asylum seekers that we are seeking to change in order to change the calculus of those who are seeking to get on a boat in the north of France, because ultimately where we want to be as a government is actually we take people, refugees, into this country through safe and legal routes in the future, rather than incentivising the people smuggling chain and the gangs across northern France and wider Europe as well. I've got Camilla Tomley from...
Sorry, I just want to follow up.
I'm running out of time. I'd like to move on to the next question, please.
Home Secretary, good morning. You're targeting 4 countries, including Afghanistan, with the new visa bans. But in reality, Pakistan accounts for the biggest share of people who enter the UK on legal visas and later claim asylum, about a quarter of the total, or nearly 10,000 people last year. Migrants from Pakistan also topped the table for all asylum claims last year, but despite more than 70% of those claims being rejected, just 4% were returned. So why haven't you also applied a visa ban to Pakistan?
Firstly, this is new action that I'm taking for the first time. It's not the end of the action that we will take. I won't give a running commentary on discussions we're having with other countries. If you look at those tables, there are a number of other countries where the numbers are very high. We will, of course, be speaking to our counterparts who already are. And this is the beginning and not the end of the action that we will take in this area. I've got Martina Bett from the Sun.
Thank you very much, Martina Bett from the Sun. Britain paid around 170 million to France last year to help stop channel crossings, yet only about 35% of boats were prevented. How can you tell taxpayers that this deal represents value for money? And are you prepared to renew our contract with the French when it expires this month without demanding results? Thank you.
Well, look, of course, any deal that we strike, and this is a deal that we inherited as a government, we are, of course, in discussions with our French counterparts. Any deal we have to justify that deal to the British public and justify why that is a good spend of our money. But I think it's important to note we've seen an increase in law enforcement activity through our collaboration with the authorities in France. We have seen 40,000 crossings diverted. We've seen 5,000 disruptions of gang activity that was designed to get people into boats. We know that the disruption activity works because the business model of the gangs changes as well. So partly because the disruption of small boats as they used to be was quite successful, the gangs have moved on to the so-called taxi boat model. So what you often see is that you have effect of the policies on one type of way that the gangs are using, and then they will obviously try to innovate and move on to another type of business model. And so it's important that we obviously try to keep pace with the changes in practice that we're seeing from the gangs and the type of kit and the equipment that they are using. You've seen we've worked in collaboration with a whole range of countries, both where the kit is made, where it is stored, and then ultimately how it comes to being used. So I think that activity is important. Without it, the number of crossings would be even higher. So of course we want to see maximum impact from the deal that we have with France. They also want as much impact as possible because, of course, before those individuals get on a boat in the north of France, they're often in camps in the north of France, causing additional issues in that region of the country. So it's in our collective interest to have a deal that has high impact, and that's what we're obviously aiming for the future as well. Next, I've got Brie Allegretti from the Times. Sorry.
Thank you, Home Secretary Allegretti from the Times. You've obviously taken a lot of questions on this subject today. You've acknowledged that Labour is a broad church and said that you're confident you will get these migration reforms through Parliament. But there's one thing I'm still unclear on, and that's whether you're saying that there is any room for manoeuvre. Is your message there will be no watering down? These plans are essential in their totality, or are you signalling that you could be open to compromise if Labour MPs in enough numbers demand it? And if I may, one of your Conservative predecessors, Suella Braverman, once said it was her dream and obsession to remove small boat migrants to Rwanda. Do you have a dream or obsession for an achievement in mind in your office to bear down on illegal migration? Thank you.
Look, yes, you're right. The Labour Party is a broad church, and there are lots of conversations happening. I think there's a distinction between the reforms that we're already pressing ahead with today. Obviously, I've set out that the changes from permanent refugee leave to temporary, and the review after 2.5 years that will come into effect towards the end of this month. But the date for when it will apply to applications is from this Monday onwards. That decision is already made. The decision to revoke the duty to provide asylum support to a power, that is also happening by means of a statutory instrument today. So we are pressing ahead. So it's less of a question of, as you say, some room for manoeuvre in some areas. We are very much pressing ahead. There is a consultation on early settlement. So these are the reforms around moving from 5 years to 10, which cohorts of people can earn an earlier settlement at 5 years or maybe even 3 years, and those who will have to wait longer. That is a consultation. It ended on the 12th of February. We are currently going through the responses now. There were over 200,000, so it will take us a little bit of time to have done all of that work. And in that consultation process, people have made suggestions of transitional arrangements, things we might do differently, particularly on if we have minimum income requirements, whether those attach to individuals or whether they attach to households, for example. So there are points of detail here that we have deliberately consulted on across the whole picture, particularly on transitional arrangements. So obviously I will look at the proposals made in the consultation and then finalise the policy later this year with a view to enacting the final policy again later this year. So there is still some work to do, but that was always the case for the early settlement consultation. But the principles behind that consultation, the fact that we want to move to a model that rewards contribution, the fact that actually for the new norm, the qualifying period will move from 5 years to 10, the fact that we do need to deal with the very large number of lower skilled migrants who come into this country, the largest rate of low skilled entry into this country that we have ever seen in our history, and all of the attendant issues that has, we do have to have an answer to that particular issue as well. So those are the principles that are sitting underneath that settlement consultation, and we will obviously finalise the policy in due course. In terms of dreams and obsessions, Look, I'm determined to do the right thing for the country. These reforms are the right thing for the country. I want to deliver an ordered and controlled migration system that retains public confidence across a plurality of voters all across our country, so that we have the public permission to both retain an asylum system at all and to continue our system of legal migration as well. I think if we can do that, we can unite our country around an issue that is currently dividing our country, and that is something that I consider my duty and my responsibility. I've got Martin Beckford from the Daily Mail next.
Thank you. As you know, next Saturday is due to be the Al Quds Day march, which will start outside your office, the Home Office. Given the fears that have been expressed that it will lead to disorder, anti-Semitism, and the spectacle of people expressing support for the Iranian regime, do you think it should go ahead, or will you request that the Metropolitan Police cancel it?
Well, the decision on specific marches is an operational matter for police, and I'm not going to interfere with operational independence. What I would say is we, of course, have a range of powers where protests are concerned, primarily around conditionality for those protests, so the time period over which they can occur, where precisely they have to be located. There is an existing power of ban, but it's been very rarely used because, as people who are well versed in this territory know, the policing of a ban can often be more tricky than the policing of a protest in the first place. So these are finely balanced judgments on how best to maintain public order that are made by the police each time any of these events occurs. And I would expect the police to be, of course, using their full powers, but using their professional judgment on what is the best way to maintain order on our streets. I've got Kieran Stacey next from The Guardian.
Thank you. Kieran Stacey from The Guardian. The pilot scheme that you've announced envisages that 150 families will be offered money to leave voluntarily. If they don't accept, they might be forced to leave. How much force are you willing to see border officials use against children in particular if their families do not take up this offer?
So we are currently consulting. It's a targeted consultation on how to effect the removal of families from the country. It's actually a consultation on two parts. One is on how to withdraw support for those who are not complying and who have exhausted all of their appeal rights and do not have the right to remain in the country. And then, of course, there's the other part of the consultation is on the handling of children and others in order to effect a smooth removal. That was a targeted consultation with the Children's Commission, with local authorities and with others as to how best to implement this policy. We already have policies across other bits of the public sector that are about enforcement where children are concerned. There are well used legal texts for how to do so in a way that's necessary but also proportionate, and how to best judge that, and then also how to best scrutinise that. So I'd expect the principles that underlie this sort of work in other parts of the public sector to inform the approach that we take within immigration as well. But that is why, in the end, a voluntary removal is always the best option for all concerned. It's the best for the taxpayer because it's the cheapest option, but it's also the best for the families as well. And you can't be in a position where essentially you're incentivising families to not play ball with all of the attendant impacts that has on their children's lives, using the youngest child in order to have a longer stay in this country. So we have rules, we do have to enforce them, and the lack of enforcement of them creates its own kind of incentives and pressures in the system as well. Can I have Michael Knowles now from the Express?
Thank you, Home Secretary. How are you going to increase the number of removals among the small boat cohorts who are particularly difficult to deport? Thank you.
Well, we're already seeing an increase in removal. So under us, we've had the highest rate of removals, I think, in at least a decade or more, with big increases in enforcement across the picture. So removals are just under 60,000 at the moment with this government. They will go up. Of course, there are some barriers to removal. So, for example, if somebody is from a country that is not yet deemed safe, we do not return people to countries that are not safe. That is a difference between us and what is on offer from other political parties, but we're not going to be removing people to danger. But we will, of course, monitor country situations, and as soon as it becomes possible for us to remove people to their home countries, we will do so.
Please, Matt, we need to go last one.
Oh, okay. So that's Dave Burke at the Mirror.
Hi, thank you, Home Secretary. Home Secretary, I spoke to a family last week who are upset by the indefinite leave to remain proposals. They argue it's unfair to change the law retrospectively. Their teenage daughter is now uncertain if she'll be able to continue studies in the UK because of eligibility for student finances. They say this is contrary to what they were promised when they arrived, and they made plans accordingly. What would you say to people like this who think the proposals are punching down on individuals because you don't like the previous government's rules? And what's your message to families in this situation?
Well, look, as I said in my speech, we've never seen a scale of low-skilled migration into this country of the kind that we've seen in these last few years in our history. So we've had a pace and scale of migration into the country over the last 4 years that has outpaced what had happened in the previous 40 years. So that is the reason why the government can't simply ignore what has happened and to not try to effect change, because of all of the attendant pressures that will have on public services as well. As I said, the Migration Advisory Committee's report, we estimate based on their findings, this is a cost of £10 billion to the Exchequer. So we have questions to answer for citizens on every side of this picture, and it is important that the government shows that it is able to rise to the scale of the challenge that has been posed by what has happened under the last Conservative government. What I would say I don't know the individual circumstances of that family, but I would say is that in the unsettlement proposal, we have set out a range of qualifying periods for how people can earn settlement in this country. Those who make the highest contributions will be able to earn an earlier period of settlement. Those who don't will have longer. Those who have use of benefits or have a criminal record will obviously be on much longer paths or not get settlement at all. So it is a range, and different people will fall in different parts of that range that is being suggested for the settlement proposals. They are obviously subject to consultation at the moment. We will finalise the detail and publish the full range of policy choices later this year. Okay, I think that was it. Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you for your speech. Did you want to...
Come over, yes sir, coming over.
Excellent. Thank you, first of all, for joining us here today. We're really delighted to be hosting you. So, the first question from us here at IPPR. You've said clearly that changes needed to address the public concerns around divisions on migration, and you've also warned that reforms plans are too extreme and divisive. So I'd really like to understand from you how you distinguish between reforms that will restore public confidence and those that risk fueling division. How do you draw the line? Where's the line for you?
Well, that's why I think we pursue reforms in line with our Labour values, as I've just been saying in the speech, based on fairness, based on compassion, but control as well, rules that are actually enforced, and a set of rules that reward contribution. I think that if you're able to show the country that we can do what I think most people believe is the right thing, which is support people who want to make their home in this country, who come here lawfully, support those who are fleeing war and persecution elsewhere. People do want to try to do the right thing, but they also want to know that the system overall is well managed. And I think they've got plenty of evidence to prove it hasn't been well managed in recent years, and that is the task that we have in front of us. So I think the approach has to be in line with our values as a Labour Party, the sort of behaviour we want to encourage, the behaviour that we want to support, and then also the behaviour that will lead to enforcement of our rules and a denial of the right to be in our country as well. So I think it's the combination of that, which I do believe has a plurality of support across every type of voter group in this country.
As we prepared for this event, we went out to quite a lot of the migration sector, who are obviously on the front line of supporting people that are struggling in the asylum system. and we asked what they wanted to ask you. And as you can imagine, we've got a wave of questions. So we're actually going to send all those questions to your office.
All right,
Because we can't, I'm not going
No, it's fine.
to put them all to you right now, but we'd love you to respond. But the three that we picked to ask you directly. So Kristen Jarrett from We Belong has asked, for individuals currently on a pathway to settlement under existing rules, can you commit to a clear and fair transitional set of arrangements from the system that exists when they started that process, and the rules they thought they were working under, and then the rules that you're now introducing? So it's the kind of retrospectivity question.
Yeah, look, I think, as I've said in the questions and in my speech already, that part of what we're trying to deal with is a wave of low-skilled migration of a kind that we've never seen in this country before. That does pose its own challenges, and challenges that citizens here also raise with me. So, of course, if you're in this part of the sector, I fully understand that these are the people you're dealing with every day. I deal with a constituency of very varied interests on this matter, high levels of diversity, it's over 70% non-white, and I have the opposite question often coming at me, which is, why are we paying for more and more? So there is a balance to be struck here, and we do have duties to those who are already here, and duties to those who are ultimately going to pick up the tab. So I guess the question really is, who pays and who ultimately bears the burden? And we know that based on the Migration Advisory Committee's findings, this is a big lifetime cost that the taxpayers of this country are on the hook for. And so there are big questions here. That's why we have consulted on the transitional arrangements. But I would also just gently say that this is the problem we're trying to fix, and so we do have to come up with an answer for it. That is something that we're going to have to take into account. The other thing I would just remind everybody is it has always been the case, and this has been tested in case law before, in appeal courts as well, that the rules that apply to your application under our immigration rules are the rules in force at the time of your application, not at the time of your arrival in the country, because there is a recognition that immigration rules change. They change quite regularly, and in fact we have 2 sets of immigration rule changes as a matter of course every single year as well. So in terms of the rules applying at the point at which you make your application, that has been settled practice in this country for many years now.
Just a brief follow-up on the fiscal contribution of care workers. Do you think it's fair to just judge a care worker on their fiscal contribution, and is not the challenge there that we don't pay our care workers enough, not that they're not willing to make a contribution to this country?
Well, there is a wider question about the care sector and levels of pay and conditions within that sector. Obviously, West Keating and the Department for Health and Social Care have already made some changes there. I think the plans are by 2028 to have a fair pay deal and to start improving conditions in that sector. So I would hope that for all care workers, whether they are settled citizens, British citizens in this country, or people that come from abroad to work in that sector in the future, of course we want higher standards for what is an important sector for our country. But for a system of economic migration, you really do need to look at economic impact. I think that is the right thing. Otherwise, it's not really a system of economic migration. And then for certain types of jobs that we struggle to fill, of course, we do sometimes drop requirements, and we do give those people a different kind of deal. I think what's happened under the Tories is you just had this mass drop to below RQF level 6. And then the numbers that arrive, particularly dependents, are in the multiple hundreds of thousands, which was never planned for, and that's the public policy challenge that we have in front of us today.
So the question from Mabeen Bhuta from the British Red Cross: what evidence does the government have that people will be able to integrate and work and contribute effectively at the same time as their refugee status has become more short-term and as this is the kind of revalidation process? What evidence are you drawing on to say that will allow you to meet the kind of aspirations that you set for your policies of contribution?
Well, look, there's a principal basis here. I mean, we are deliberately making different choices for what happens to people when they arrive in this country based on the way that they have come. In the future, as we get on with setting up our safe and legal routes for refugee workers, refugee students, and also people coming with through the community sponsorship model, that will be the most privileged way to enter this country as a refugee. And I think it's important to change the calculus of people that are looking to pay thousands and thousands of pounds to criminal gangs and people smugglers. That is the worst way to try and come to this country, that we will take a fair share of people from around the world and offer sanctuary, but in a way that is controlled, set on our terms, and through routes that we manage ourselves, not things that are in the pay of people smugglers. So I think it is right to try to distinguish as a matter of principle between the different ways in which people enter and then what they can expect having entered in that way. So there is a deliberate policy principle here, and that is why the totality of the reforms, as we settle the policy on earned settlement, when put together, it will be very clear that the very worst outcomes are for those who have come by paying smugglers a lot of money and getting on a boat. But actually, as we grow the numbers that we take ourselves as refugee students and workers, those people will have the most privileged setup of all. So I think that's the right thing to do. Also, within the new core protection model, we will of course also, alongside that, set up the protection work and study route, which will give people a chance, if they can study or contribute to the country, to this country, to switch into that route, which will also, I think, help to integrate them as well. So it is a combination of the two that I think makes the overall package fair.
And then a question from Laura Taylor from the Refugee and Migration Policy Project. You've said that immigration policy should be fair and should value contribution, but your reforms mean at the moment that, for example, a child of a wealthy banker could secure settlement in 3 years, while a child of a care worker might wait 15. What message does that say about what contributions we value as a country?
Well, again, I'll just repeat, it's a system of economic migration, so I think economic impacts have to be taken into account in the system of economic migration. But secondly, actually, through the earned settlement proposals, we are looking to essentially treat people as individuals wherever possible for their journey to settlement. And we will have to have bespoke routes for children, because of course there will be a difference. It won't make sense to necessarily treat children who arrive here very young the same as those who arrive, just shy of their 18th birthday. Those are matters of detail that we've consulted on and that we will draw up our full proposals for. But in the future, we are looking to look at settlement by individual rather than by family cohort, so to distinguish the two, because everybody should be on their own settlement journey.
And then final question from me, really. You just made the point that you have to balance here the concerns of communities up and down the country that feel that change has happened too rapidly at times in the last few decades, and with the kind of desire to have a proper asylum system for people that have genuine claims. Whatever the level of migration we have, what do you want the government to do, and what are you doing, what do you want to do further to ease the pressures on communities across the country that are still dealing with the legacy of austerity, that feel that their public services are under strain, that the kind of the social space, the kind of social infrastructure is crumbling? What do you think we need to do there to make sure that communities are resilient to whatever level of migration we end up settling at?
So on the cohesion side, I see it slightly differently, which is I think we first have to deal with the fact that one of the biggest drivers of division in the country, something that's really strained at social cohesion in our country, is the boats and the wider migration system being uncontrolled, in chaos, not well managed. And I think that is really genuinely fueling division. I hear that from ethnic minority constituents as much as I hear it from white constituents as well. So there is deep concern in the country. I do think this issue has been tearing our country apart. And so that's why I do think it's important to come up with a set of proposals that are capable of both managing that system, but also, proving to the public that we can have a system of both asylum and legal migration into the country that they can have confidence in, that they can believe in, and that we can feel proud of, that we're doing the right thing, we're giving people a chance, but in a way that suits us as well. So it is a balance between people with competing interests. And I do think that for those who are already here, for our citizens, we do have to hear what they are saying as well. And one of the temptations amongst the debate is to talk about the wider economy and to sort of make an assumption that as long as the wider economy is doing well, then no one's going to worry about immigration or the pace of change in their societies. I just don't think that's true. I've been a frontline politician for 16 years now. I've very diversity on my own. I've been to many other constituencies. I used to run the general election campaigns. I've travelled a lot. I've talked to a lot of people. And what I always hear is, you can't divert people to, here's a bigger concern that you have and we've sorted it. You need to forget about this one. they've cottoned onto a genuinely broken system. You can't say to them, you're making it up, or you're misinformed, or you're wrong. I see it for myself every day. This is a broken system. Somebody has to fix it. And in fixing it, you have to show how we're fixing it, the principles that drive the new system, and to build public confidence in it for the future. But I do think it's possible. Separate to that, of course, lots of public services are under pressure. As a government, obviously, we are trying to rebuild our public services, whether that's health, whether that's education, and others that I've been involved with, like the criminal justice system overall. You know, we are pursuing big reform programs. We've funded more of these services as well. It does take time to turn around 14 years of Tory government, but we are cracking on with that, and that will be important, I think, to give confidence to communities. But I think that is slightly separate from the wider issue of support for an immigration system, because I think we're in a fight to prove we can have a working system of migration in this country that the public can have confidence in.
Thank you so much, Home Secretary, for your time today, for joining us. I just want to explain the reason we haven't offered you water is not
because I'm fasting.
It's not a hardcore interviewing technique like us. Thank you for joining us today, and I want to just also thank our amazing team here at IPPR who've put on this event, particularly Holly and Vicky and Marley, so thank you to them. And I hope everyone has a brilliant rest of the day and joins us again here at IPPR soon. Thank you
Thanks so much.